We're back, and organically speaking, the theme today has sort of become the concept of story and how it relates to our businesses. And so we thought we'd regale you with a couple of stories here to give you an idea of what we mean by that. And I want to start with Patricia. She's told a very interesting story about communication and how she got some effective communication out of a corporate setting.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Well, in the last segment, we were talking about the value of stories in making change in corporations. And that's what we want to do, is to make change, be mentors in helping change to happen at the leadership level and actually every level of the organization. So we were talking about the values of stories as a part of leadership and as a part of sustaining a successful organization. And I had one that I was sharing that actually happened a few years ago. I was in Indianapolis, Indiana, at a major corporation. It was Christmas time. And the subject of the workshop was effective communication. And so instead of doing something about corporate America at that moment, we took it to the heart of who they are as people, because true leadership goes to the heart. And that is exactly where it comes from, regardless of the story. And so I said, what we're going to do today to kick this workshop off is, it's Christmas time, and let's send a note. Let's make up a Christmas card. And I had carbon or paper that we could use. And I said, let's make a Christmas card and tell somebody that is important in our life how we really feel and what that story is that you had at the moment they made a difference in your life. And it was so interesting. First of all, they struggled. The adults, these were corporate level professionals, and they struggle to say, well, I don't know, because they all go to the store and buy the Christmas card that says whatever they think. This one was taking it to the heart. What would you say? And some of them talked to their children, some of them talked to their mother, but it was interesting. It was a struggle getting started. But as we worked through, and I said, how are you doing? And they started talking to each other, communicating to each other. And I cut that off after a while and said, okay, here's what I'd like for you to do, is to start now and write something. And the interesting thing, when we processed that, because we were talking about communication, when we processed it, I asked each person if they wanted to, would they be willing to share? There were tears. There were applauses from the rest of the people, and it was probably one of the most meaningful moments that I had experienced in something like that. And it was from them telling their story of how someone had made a major change in their life, and to be able to send it in a Christmas card and to say a holiday card, whatever you want to call it, to say, this is how I feel. And I really, this was an exciting moment. But I also heard another member of our group tell their story, and it is so fabulous. And it goes to corporate America at a different level. And could you share your story?
Sure. My story takes place many decades before yours. I was 12 years old, and it was my first job outside of helping my dad in his business. And I worked for Simonis's Hot Dogs. It was a little diner that a few presidents have actually visited on their trips to Maine. Nonetheless, it wasn't anything beautiful. It was what you would typically expect of a diner. And my job was to fill condiment containers and salt and pepper shakers and bus tables. And there were a couple of things that I thought could be improved in the way we were doing things, and how the efficiencies could be improved. And I was hesitant to say anything because I was 12, and who would listen to me? And I did approach the two gentlemen who owned the hot dog stand, and I explained what I thought would make things more efficient and would make better use of my time. And they sat there, they paid attention to me, they listened to me, and some of my ideas were actually implemented. And what that did for me was two things. First, it helped build my own self-confidence. And the second thing, it was a lesson that I carried through for the rest of my life into the businesses that I created. Someone paid attention to me, the person on the floor doing the work, trying to do a better job and make the business more efficient.
Mm-hmm.
I always listened to my people. I went on the production floors in my print shops and asked them, how can we do this better? What are your ideas? And we would implement their ideas. And if for some reason it wasn't cost effective, I would explain what the issues were on that side of the fence. And some of these people would come back and say, well, okay, what if we did it this way? Could we do it this way?
Mm-hmm.
They had the buy-in. And my business has always thrived because of all the people involved in the company. So I created a culture that I needed in my business to make my business thrive.
Let me turn it around for you for a moment. As that 12-year-old child, what do you think your bosses saw in you that made a 12-year-old child worth listening to?
Well, they saw me do my job. They saw me work diligently, and I was there on time. I did all the things that I was supposed to do as an employee. I didn't shirk any of my responsibilities, whether that was mopping up garbage that was on the floor from the patrons, or again, working in the heat in the summer because there was no air conditioning in that place, and the steam from the hot dog machines made it really unbearable sometimes. But I was there, and they just saw something, I guess, in me too.
Mm-hmm. People, you know, you're looking for connections. People look for connections, whether they think they are or not, and they see the slightest inclination in you to pull on that connection, they'll do so. They saw that in you, and now you in turn see that in them because you know how appreciated you felt. Mm-hmm. I'll just share a quick story of in the regard of that appreciation. You reminded me of something, but actually both of you did. Patricia, talking about coming from the heart. A few years ago, I was having a awful evening. I was this side of deep depression. I was just miserable and couldn't see anything positive. And I prayed through it. I got the distinct impression that the Lord wanted me to encourage somebody. So I had my laptop with me, and so I sent an email to a friend of mine. She's an actress, and something big was going on in her acting career that night. It was a premiere of something big, and so I was congratulating her. Well, that was an easy one. And I heard, do another. So I thought of somebody else I sent an email to. Now do a hard one. And I thought of somebody that would be difficult to encourage because I haven't gotten a whole lot of encouragement from that person, but I dove in. Do another hard one. I kept hearing this. And I went back through old supervisors, old co-workers, old cohorts in other aspects that maybe I felt did me wrong, whatever. And some people that I hadn't reached out to in years and said, you know what, your friendship, when I needed it back in that day, meant so much to me. Just little things like that. These were not long emails, but I ended up doing 20 of them at God's prompting. I won't take credit for this because I'm not that generous. But that night, I wrote 20 emails of encouragement, and you wouldn't believe what I got back. Not only did I get people saying, boy, it's great to hear from you, but I heard, you have no idea how much I needed to hear that tonight. And I had another one call me and reach out about how his marriage was falling apart and his son had issues and and he was pouring his heart out to me. Hadn't talked to him in maybe a year and a half. People need that connection. And it's funny, the whole lesson for me was get outside of your own head. Mm-hmm. And go bless somebody else. Mm-hmm. And guess who got the most blessing?
Yep.
Yes.
Craig, we've heard a few stories here. Anything you'd like to wrap up with or add to?
Well, I think of, I heard a couple of words. I heard stories. I heard culture. I heard other things. I heard from the bottom up how the stories affected us. But one thing that we know is leadership drives the culture. The culture of a company is often built on stories of early days of the managers or the owners and how they started. There's good examples of that, and there's terrible examples of that. I once worked for a company that I kind of hesitate saying this because some people will know what this company is when I tell the story. But their story, you know, their thought was that you need strength. Their early logo was one of a shark. So they're in a shark tank, you know, that their symbol, their logo made a shark fin. And one of the things they would tell their division managers are that we put 9 cats in a paper bag and the strongest one comes out. And that was their culture. And I worked there, and they were very successful. But my story related to them whenever I told this, because I was a speaker on culture and those kind of things, I would say, you put 9 cats in a paper bag, how much work, the strongest one comes out, but how much work gets done? What damage did you do? Do the other cats come out at all? And so now, what if I put 9 sled dogs in a paper bag and I waited for the strongest one to come out? How fast is that sled going to go?
Mm.
Because that story was what that company was built on. So there's good and bad. Usually it's good because that's what brings the company to success. But there's also the other side of that. What struck me was a 12-year-old working, and that used to be common. I worked when I was 11, and because our family didn't own, but ran Holiday Inns. And so that used to be common, but that story stayed with somebody all her life.
Mm-hmm.
You know, these other stories stay with people all their lives. And sometimes you're building motivation, sometimes you're building a culture, sometimes you're doing other things that are going to be positive, and some of them are negative. I got a lot of negative stories in my head, you know, and I got a lot of positive stories in my head. So on every level, I think it's important to us to remember that we are telling stories. Denny, you mentioned something about God prompting you. Well, every lesson learned in the Bible comes from a parable almost of some kind of story. And that's what motivates people. And when we were talking about the book Geronimo Stone, and we didn't mention the name, but that's all around a story. Good to Great is about a bunch of stories. You know, the Raving Fans, that's a story. All these stories become important to teach those important things related to problem solving and related to all kinds of things in our business. So I think that was a real good, nice turn of events that led us down this path. Denny, if anybody else has something to say, if not, then I suggest we close this one off and we work on another one for next time.
All right.
I
And
just
that's
like
our
to-
story. And we're sticking to it.
Oh,
Ann, wait, Pat, you said, were you going to add something?
I was just going to say that change and mentoring change in corporations comes through many avenues, and storytelling is one key that we just brought out today.
Yep. Thank you. We'll see you next week.